They were preparing them to send them to Rotten Island, where similarly only Guan and lizard could have survived there. Half of them died in the 6 months. There's a report as to what happened. And they exiled 2,445 as the actual number in 1797 to Central America. Sorry, they actually, yes, they deported 2,445. But the actual number which arrived was 2,026. Some died along the way. Thus, less than 2,000 Garifuna Kalinagos survived in St. Vincent after British genocide and forced exile. As such, therefore, the British exterminated from St. Vincent through genocide 5,167 persons and forced deportation 2,026, or some 7,193 Garifuna people, 80% of the nation of St. Vincent and Grenadines. See that Michael Curtin number of 90% is not off the mark. So when people see that, they say this historian and fellas always talk crap. By giving you now the actual numbers. These are not fictional. These come from actual historical records. These are horrendous statistics of an incredible historic crime of genocide, for which the British must pay appropriate recompense to the nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, including the descendants of the Garifuna Kalinago people. Interestingly, the British had also forcibly deported rebels from Taki revolt in Jamaica in 1760 and the Fedon rebellion in Grenada in 1795 to the same Bay of Honduras. The policy. You have troublemakers, we get them out of the region. We either kill them or we send them to Central America. You know what happened? You know what happened to our people in Central America? They left Rotten Island. They have a settlement in Belize. The main place in Belize is an area called Danriga. But they're also in Honduras, they are in Guatemala, and they are in Nicaragua. There are 60,000 of them in the Bronx. Yes. And all of them see St. Vincent, known in their language as you remain, as sacred spiritual ground. When they come, when they land in St. Vincent, they kiss the ground. You know, what we have to do is to make sure that while we do conduct public policy, we are mindful of the history. When the hurricane struck Belize in 2002, Danriga got hit more than anywhere else. I took that opportunity to have, throughout the whole of our educational system, an education to the children for the link between ourselves and the Garifuna in Belize. I asked them each to give $1 single, and I'll match that with an equal amount. I took the check of $60,000 down to Belize. I gave it myself to the Prime Minister. And my poor country, we lent Belize for them to rehabilitate $10 million. You know why? They are our kith, and they are our kin, and we are joined by something unbreakable. But you see, if you don't have memory, if you do not have memory, you can get blown away. You have to have memory and turn that memory into serious public policy. Bettles makes the point that the clearest of legal claims is that of native genocide. Powerful as the one which we have for African slaves. He says that in his book. I turn now to the history of slavery in the Caribbean. In 9 chapters of his book, Bettles meticulously documents the historiography of the slave trade, slavery emancipation, and the payment of reparations to the slave owners. The chapter headings point to the focus of his analysis. Hear what the 9 chapters say. King James Version, Royal Caribbean Slave Voyages. I tell you, the titles of my brother are really, the chapter headings are really sweet. Not Human, Britain's Black Property. The Zong Massacre, Jamaica-bound Africans murdered. How many of you inside here know about the Zong Massacre? Put up your hand. Ah, you see how many more you need to read it? That alone means you must read the book. By the way, how many of you know about the Garifuna? More people know about the Garifuna than the Zong. Interesting. You learned it from Hillary? Yes. And Vereen? Yes. Prostituting enslaved Caribbean women. Criminal enrichment, building Britain with slavery. Dividends from the devil, Church of England, chattels in Barbados. Earls of Haywood, slave route to Buckingham Palace. Slave owners in Parliament and the private sector. £20 million. Slave owners, reparations. Each of these chapters is riveting reading, with an abundance of new material and well-known data refreshingly presented. And I tell you, I have pages and pages of this. I don't want to go through that because it is familiar territory to many persons. Except to say this. There are some who still want to believe that abolition of slavery is because Wilberforce and the abolitionists did the trick. Well, they were good people and they pushed the issue in Parliament. But as Eric Williams tells us in Capitalism and Slavery, it is mercantile capitalism had brought into being slavery. And slavery contributed immensely to increasing the wealth in Britain and fueling the development of industrial capitalism, upon which slavery became a brake to its further expansion, and therefore it had to go at some time. And of course, as we are reminded by Richard Hart, in the slaves who abolished slavery, that what took place on the ground also contributed immensely. So we're not denying any role for the abolitionists. I just want to say this, remind us, when we are assessing this, and particularly for the students, but for all of us, there's a book written by a man you don't hear much about these days. His name is Karl Marx. Intellectuals don't even want to talk about him, much less the prime ministers. But I talk about him all the time. And I get 3 terms. And I'm going to get a 4th. You hear me?
Going around and coming back around.
Marx, in his book, The 18 Brumaire Blue Napoleon, in 1869, says this. And this is where you're assessing the role of people in the history, including the abolitionists. Quote, men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. So the abolitionists were good people, but they have to have the circumstances in which that had to be done. Similarly, C.L.R. James in Black Jacobins, making the same point in a different way, says, quote, great men make history, but only such history as it is possible for them to make. Their freedom of achievement is limited by the necessities of their environment. To portray the limits of those necessities and the realization, complete or partial, of all the possibilities, that is the true business of the historian, unquote. Now, some people may say, why is it no? Talking about reparations. What about Manley and Burnham and Barrow and Williams, the man of capitalism and slavery? The fact is this, that great men make history, but only such history as it is possible for them to make at the particular point in time. It is now possible for us to make the history in respect of reparations, and that is why. What you must do is to imagine if Manley, Burnham, Barrow, and Williams were around now. You'll hear them on this subject. I have no doubt about that. Now, from the standpoint of reparations for African enslavement, it does not matter greatly on what side of the causation debate in respect of the abolition of the slave trade and slavery that one comes down. What is vital is to grasp the criminal and inhumane nature of the slave trade and slavery, and the immense contribution of slavery and the West Indian colonies to the British economy, and the unanswerable case for reparations. That's what is important in this debate. So even those who want to go mainly to say the abolitionists, that's fine, so long as they appreciate that it was a criminal thing, and the immense contribution of slavery and the West Indian colonies to the British economy, and the unanswerable case for reparations. And of course, Beckles discusses all of these things. You know, sometimes when our own people discuss things, they say, you'll have the person say, people like Beckles and Vereen and fellow travelers like Ralph, because I'm not in the class of these distinguished historians, I have to learn from them. But let us just pause for one moment about a man who was a slave master, a slave captain, who turned minister of the gospel, by the name John Newton. Wrote something in 1788 called Thoughts of the African Slave Trade, a memoir of my infidel days as a slave captain. That's a man who, 4 years, that's a man, sorry, for a little earlier, and I'll come to that, wrote Amazing Grace. How sweet the song. This is what he said. Quote, slaves are the staple article of the traffic. And though a considerable number may have been born near the sea, I believe the bulk of them are acquired from afar. I have reason to think that some travel more than 1,000 miles before they reach the sea coast. Whether there may be convicts among them, these likewise, or what proportion they may bear to those who are taken as prisoners of war, it is impossible to know. But I judge the principal source of slaves to be the wars which prevail among the natives. I verily believe that the far greater part of the wars in Africa would cease if the Europeans would cease to tempt them by offering goods for slaves. So you have some people who will tell you African people also had to pay reparations because they were involved in the selling. Well, Beckles debunks all that in the book. But you have testimony here from John Newton to tell you that that is pure rubbish. No. I want us to move on and for us to identify what is critical. One of the critical issues in our debate on reparations is the criminal enrichment building Britain with slavery. And in Beckles' book, there is a wealth of information about the criminal enrichment. And he takes on all those who want to apologize and say, no, slavery didn't really build up Britain. He took them on with assistance by other people, other historians, to debunk that thesis. Indeed, you know, when they write, as early as these apologists, as early as 1692, there's an English economist and nationalist, English nationalist, named Sir Joshua Child. He made it plain that Britain's wealth has come from the slave trade and the colonies. In fact, he said Barbados was worth more to England than all the American colonies combined. He said the Caribbean had become the most precious group of colonies ever recorded. And Jamaica didn't come on the scene yet properly by 1692. Because Jamaica became the kingpin towards the end of the 18th century. And support for the position about the riches provided to Britain, the wealth, comes from distinguished economists such as economic historians Barbara Solo, William Darity, Robin Blackburn, Gavin Wright, Jacob Price, and J.E. Irihuri. And there's a recent book which has come out by David Ryden, West Indian Slavery and the British Abolition, 1783 to 1807, that come out just after Hillary had sent his manuscript. So there's only an article, I checked it. There's an article by Ryden in your list, but not the book, because that book had not yet come out. So, and the literature overwhelmingly demonstrates the significant role of the slave trade played in the capital accumulation in Britain. And we can stake out authoritatively the claim that the slave fueled economic growth in the Americas was a vital component to Britain's industrial growth. No question about that. There's some institutions, personalities, families and companies in the slave enterprise in the Caribbean. The Church of England, just mentioned here. Don't know if you know this. At emancipation, 138 bishops and other clergymen across the region received compensation for slaves, you know. 62 of them were in Jamaica. Yes. 20 in Barbados, 16 in Antigua. and 6 in St. Vincent. Then, the same thing with a society known as the London Society of West Indian Planters and Merchants. Very powerful lobby. Beckles has discussed it in his book, and I have also brought additional information from elsewhere. You know the names here: Simon Taylor, James Pinnock, William Chisholm, Philip Delaney, Brian Edwards, and Nathaniel Phillips. They join a long-established set of absentee families like the Longs, the Beckfords, and the Pennants. All of those people. And if you trace their descendants, a lot of them are very wealthy still in the United Kingdom. Now, you know, how many here know about Simon Taylor? Let me see how many people who know about Simon. Well, very little know about Simon Taylor. You all know about Simon Taylor? Yeah. A few. Let me tell you about Simon Taylor, because I can't know these fellas, you know, in the debate. You have to put faces, and we have to trace them. Not trace them in the way we talk about cussing them, but trace them from the standpoint, trace how they come down. This fellow was a real cantankerous grandee. This is how he is described. Despite the distance, Taylor took a great interest in metropolitan and island politics while serving as a Jamaica assemblyman for Kingston and for the parish of St. Thomas in the east. Perhaps more than any colonial, Simon Taylor coordinated political action in the Caribbean with that of the society. The Jamaican governor's wife, Marian Nugent, commented that Taylor was by much the richest proprietor in the land and in the habit of accumulating so much money so as to make his heir and nephew, Sir Simon Richard Brissett Taylor, one of the most wealthy subjects of Her Majesty. Taylor's wealth was matched by political power in the island, for he had great influence in the assembly despite being nearly superannuated. This bachelor lived the prototypical planter's life, principally with overseers of estates and masters of merchant vessels. Taylor was immersed in planter politics, showing little patience for other pursuits and rejecting the society of white women. So you need to know about Taylor. And then in St. Vincent we have to know about Sir William Young. And then the one I want to talk a little bit about is the Lascelles family, which metamorphosed into the Haywoods, the Earl of Heywood, with ties to the British family. Now, don't think I'm talking about people who are very distant, you know. The Earl of Heywood, the 7th Earl of Heywood, who entertained Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II at Bell Estate in Barbados in 1966. He was born in 1923 and he died just in July 2010. He was known in Britain, you know, he was known in Britain as a generous contributor and a philanthropist to music and the English National Opera. So he made his money here, you know. Yes, the fellas had, in Barbados, he had the family had 4 estates with an aggregate of 1,654 acres. Bell, Monk, Fortescue, and Tickets. Tickets is the place which was part of the center for the Bussa Rebellion in 1816, you know. The Heywoods were known pro-slavery people. Hillary has it all documented there. Then, in Jamaica, I don't know if you know about Heywood up here, but you should know about him. He owned 2,725 acres. Mammy Ridge in St. Ann. You know Mammy Ridge in St. Ann? Yeah, that's them. Nightingale Grove in St. Dorothy, Williams Field in the Vale in St. Thomas. There are also 4 estates in Tobago. All told, 6,705 acres. There are 1,250 enslaved Africans providing the manpower for their wealth. When Queen Elizabeth went to Barbados as a young queen in 1966, she went to visit her first cousin. That was her first cousin, you know. So when Hillary says the slavery went straight to Buckingham Palace, it's through the Haywoods. It's not fiction. And we have to know, we have to remember, and we have them listed, 22 slave-owning dukes, marquises, and earls. We need